this edition of the Redneck Mystic Lawyer podcast. With us is our Redneck Mystic Lawyer, Sloan Bashinsky. What manner of shithills are we discussing this evening, Sloan?
Well, we are under a shitheel. I am in the basement of the United States Federal Reserve.
I bet there's quite an echo, as empty as it is.
Oh, you should see all of the gold they have in here. Oh, I'm sorry. I had to go back in time, or have to go over to Fort Knox to get that. But the Goldfinger tried to get that gold, didn't they? In the James Bond movie by that name, starring James and Pussy Galore. Is that right?
Yep, that was Goldfinger and Pussy Galore too.
Yes, Pussy Galore. She was wonderful. And of course, she fell for Bond in the end, even though she was on the side of the bad guys to begin with. His charm saved the day. Maybe we need 007 and Pussy to take care of what's going on in the United States Capitol building.
That would be my prayers come true. I don't think that could possibly happen.
Well, you know any witches that got magic wands we can use?
If I did, I'd already be on that like a stink on an ape.
I only majored in economics in college, and so I'm way out of my depth talking about this shit as a scientist. I mean, you know, an economic scientist, but you are not. You have taught economics in colleges. You've written papers, and didn't probably make good firewood. And I told you this afternoon around dinner time when we were talking about what we might talk about tonight, without me making too big a fool of myself unintentionally. It's different if you do it on purpose. I compared the U.S. government debt to a very simple concept, which is illegal. It's called a Ponzi scheme.
Yep.
Would you care to expand on that just a bit?
A Ponzi scheme was invented by a guy by the name of Charles Ponzi. Charles Ponzi.
Well, imagine that. It's named after the inventor. Oh, good. Nobody stole his identity. Go ahead.
Nobody stole his identity back then. But this was the late 1890s, and he fleeced a lot of people who worked in New York and Manhattan by convincing them that if they sent him money early on, he would pay dividends to them that would be overly high out of people who invested later. It's also called a pyramid scheme.
Yes.
And that's about as simple as you can make it. But
well, people threw money at him, and he threw a little bit back at them.
You got it.
And then he decided he'd done enough of that, and he ran off with the money.
You got it.
Basically what happened.
That's basically what happened, except the U.S. government, after running up tremendous debts in the U.S. Civil War, the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, and then World War I, we created a national income tax via a amendment to the Constitution
to finance what would become the Ponzi scheme of the land of the free and the home of the brave, right?
You got it. That's it.
So I think we did a podcast about the fun I had with a lot of lawyers when they're wrapping up on my father's estate. And that I don't know whether I said this or not, can't remember. But I've got kind of a depression mentality now after living on the street so much and, eating in soup kitchens and just barely, staying alive basically. So I decided when I got my share of the inheritance after all the taxes were paid, and I'd put it in the safest thing I could find. Because at my age, I'm in my 81st year now. I don't need to be taking risk like in saying by speculating or investing in corporate stocks on the US stock market, for example, or in the Pacific Rim, or on the London Stock Exchange, or whatever.
Right.
I don't need to be trading in commodities such as pork bellies or wheat or cooking oil, diamonds, gold, whatever.
Agreed.
So I invested it basically in money markets that actually were backed by certificates of deposit, which are backed by the U.S. government, and also in Treasury bills, notes, and bonds, short term. And that was the safest thing I could think of. And you and I talked about it for a good while, and you agreed with me. It didn't mean it was safe. It was the safest thing.
Yeah, there's nothing that's sure when it comes to money, but that was the safest thing. Still, as best as I can tell, still the safest thing, even with the idiots.
Is that a good investment? Well, not according to an old friend of mine that I have handle my purchases of these instruments on the whatever exchange they can be bought on. His firm's a member of the New York Stock Exchange, and it's a very large firm now because it was bought out by a very big firm, which is actually a bank, and it's a very big bank, and it is not an American bank. Not a Russian bank either. Okay, it's not a Russian bank, not a Chinese bank, not a North Korean bank. The bank's in Europe, Western Europe. All right, and it seems to be a fairly conservative for banks these days bank. And they bought this securities firm, and I think they've probably bought others. And he said, "Well, I think if they quit messing around in the Congress and the White House, and we get a resolution of the national debt ceiling, the new one, that we should look at diversifying more into corporate bonds and corporate preferred stocks." And I was like, "Oh me, I had this conversation with him already that I didn't want to be doing that." He said, "But get more yield. In other words, higher interest rate, basically, or higher dividends." And but I'm 81 years old. I have lived on the street a good while, probably total. I was homeless 5 years or longer even. I wasn't on the street the whole time. I was living maybe in somebody's room or in a vehicle or whatever, or in a tent or in the Key West police station front lobby at night.
Right.
And so I am not interested in putting anything at risk. And if the federal government is at risk, why would I invest in a corporate bond or a corporate preferred stock? Now, we did talk about maybe me trying to buy some gold or diamonds. And I talked to him about that. He said, well, the problem with that is the people that own those securities or work those exchanges, they ain't in America. They're foreign countries. And so I said, so I'm totally dependent on them to give me my money back if I want it. He said, yeah, that's right. I said, well, that don't sound too encouraging. And we talked about the gold today, the bullion, the Krugerrands, and you said it's being salted, right?
That's correct.
That you buy gold, if you're not really getting pure gold anymore. If you buy a gold bar or whatever, gold coin, unless it's an old one, right?
That's the case.
It's almost kind of related to Bitcoins.
The most common form of trade in gold and precious metals is now in trade of quote unquote, for example, gold certificates.
Right. That's like buying stock in a company that's selling. You're giving it its money, and it's giving you a piece of paper that they claim is worth the same thing as the gold in their vault. Right?
You got it.
But you don't know exactly how much gold they have in their vault, right?
Nope. And you won't ever.
And you don't know if they have any gold in their vault, right?
That's correct.
Does
And
this
if
sound
they
like
got gypped, it's
it sounds like
possible.
Bitcoin to me?
That's a very good analogy because I can't find anything to attack that analogy at all. It's
Now,
just as
well,
unstable.
I said this afternoon when we were talking about this, or maybe this morning, I can't remember now exactly when we talked the first time about this today, but it was before we talked, right before we went on the air. It was up around midday or late morning. I said, I was thinking we might call the name of this podcast Money Yoga.
Oh, Lord, I think you better tell the audience about where that came from. And that's
Well,
a big shit
came,
hill.
yeah, well, it's a small shit hill, but it was a big shit hill of the people involved. There was a guy named Bo Lozoff, Locoff, and Bo was fairly famous in America and maybe elsewhere because books he wrote about his and his wife Sita going into prisons and talking with prisoners, American prisoners, about their spiritual life, not their relationship with God. Bo was a yogi, and Sita, they had lived in India, I think, and had a yogi or a guru over there who would bless them to come back to America to teach yoga and so forth. Now, yoga, a lot of people think of yoga as all these strange postures that people can do, and I used to do most of them. I really could. Can't now. I'd kill myself pronto if I tried it. But yoga is about much more than that. But superficially, it's about stretching your muscles and your tendons and your joints and breathing exercises. But the meditation is the key to it if you're going to try to advance spiritually. Other words, looking inside, seeing what's swimming around in there.
And quieting the inner monkey so you can see what's.
Yeah. You might have to develop exercises where you quieten your mind and your ego and all the things you want to do and when you have to have dinner tonight or get up in the morning, all that. But genuine spiritual practice, if it's done correctly. And so Bo had a great following among prison inmates in America. He was like, I don't know. It was religious for them with Bo and Sita, but mainly Bo did the talking in his books anyway. And I had my own encounters with Bo. I kind of dedicated Prisons and Freedom to him. after I had done a workshop in a max security prison in Boulder, in Canyon City, Colorado, at the request of the Episcopal prison chaplain. Father Tommy, they called him. I don't remember his last name now, but he had read my book, The High Legal Road, which had been given to him by another Episcopal priest who was the chaplain at the prison in Buena Vista, Colorado. I met that priest. He came to Boulder. He wanted to meet me, and we had lunch. And he's like, "Where in the hell did you come from?" That kind of thing. And I told him a little about my life. And then he sent the book to the guy down in Canyon City, and I think he called me. You know, in those days you could get the operator to give you somebody's landline number, and they give it to you, and they call you. They don't do that anymore. Long distance information, give me Memphis, Tennessee, trying to get in touch with Marie, and so forth. And so I went down there and did that. Then I wrote a book about the workshop. First third of the book is about that, the dedication to Bo. And I said, Bo had started, and Seah had done something I read this in their book. They had started doing something they had not done before. They started asking for donations from inmates or from anybody. And I couldn't sell the book, so I gave it to the Prison Library Project in Claremont, California, all my copies, or most all of them, to give to prisoners. And Bo had started that with Ram Dass, or George Alpert, I think was his American
Richard
name.
Alpert, yes.
Richard Alpert. But Richard, it was Richard's deal, but Bo was the ramrod. He's the one that made it work. So
Yep.
like, I'm the devil, but you're the one that makes the podcast work. Okay, well, without you, there ain't no podcast. Well, so Bo did all the hands-on work to bring the library into being. Inmates could write to the library, say, I mentioned a book on this or that. If they had one, they'd send it to him. They get it for free. And it was a very big deal. And Bo found out my book was in that library. And I found out about what I'm getting ready to tell you in this way. So I we're talking to the guy at the Prison Library Project about my stuff. And then he said, there's something I need to tell you. I said, well, what's that? He said, well, Bo asked us to tear the preface out of your book before we gave it to the inmates. And Bo had wrote to me, and he was very unhappy with the book and with me mentioning him in it. And I'd hurt his and Seah's feelings, and but he didn't say exactly what I'd said that had hurt their feelings. But I think it was what I said about them asking for donations, because I had not, I had praised him and his work. And I said, you're tearing the pages out of that book? He said, yeah, but I don't feel right about that, and I think I'm going to stop doing that. I said, wait a minute, let me think about that. I'll get back to you. He said, all right. So I got back to him, I think the next day. I said, I'll tell you what, you just keep doing that. It's Bo's karma. The book stands for itself. And I don't know what they ended up doing. And I got into some real interesting letters back and forth with Bo. May talk about that more later, but he started sending out, he got on his mailing list, and he sent out this thing saying he was going into public silence and nobody's going to hear from him for, I don't know whether it was 6 months or a year, but it was a good while for Bo to be quiet publicly.
Right.
And I didn't hear from Bo for a while, and then I got this newsletter from him. Well, he'd come out of the public silence, And right before he did it, somebody had donated a couple of 100 acres of land in Virginia, I think it was, to him so he could build a farm for inmates to come and rehab after they got out. But he needed money to do it. And so he wanted to talk to us about money yoga.
So it is just
So
past $31 trillion.
And you think that'll ever be paid back? That was a
Not in
stupid,
my wildest dreams.
that was a weak joke. Very, very weak. How much gold does the Federal Reserve have? What's the value of it, if you know?
They don't even publicly tell that anymore.
So they don't want the public to know how bad the government Ponzi scheme is.
That's correct.
Now, there's an interesting phrase in the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. It goes something like this, Section 4, 14th Amendment. The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned. We have just violated the 14th Amendment by questioning the validity of the government's debt. I don't think that's what the Section 4 of the 14th Amendment was enacted to prevent, was people having these kind of discussions. It was enacted to mean that someone cannot challenge getting paper money instead of gold from their bank, for example.
Right.
The U.S. went off the gold standard, and people wanted to get gold instead of paper money. And when they were offered paper money, they said, well, we want gold. Okay. And I think that amendment was about that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I'll tell you a story about my great grandfather, Leopld, the Jewish guy from over in Prussia or Poland, who came over to America in the 1880s, ended up in Troy, Alabama, and worked for a mercantile store owned by Mr. Fox Henderson, Frederick Fox Henderson. And my great grandmother to be was living in that town too. She was a school teacher. She was from Tennessee. Her daddy had been a Confederate officer in the Civil War. And Leopld went to work, and I understand he started out just sweeping out the mercantile store, and finally he was running it for Mr. Henderson. And one day Mr. Henderson said, well, one day Leopld told Mr. Henderson, we should start a bank. And Mr. Henderson said, well, I don't know nothing about banks. And he didn't talk like that. He was an aristocratic Southerner. And Leopld said, now this is the story I heard, okay, if I think from my mother, who was close to my great-grandmother, Elizabeth. And Leopld said, well, we already running a bank, basically. Mr. Henderson said, well, how is that, Leopld? And he said, well, people come into our store on Friday and they borrow $3 and they come back the next Friday and they pay us $4. And so he said, just send me off to banking school and I'll come back and open us a bank. So that's what happened. He went through it real quick. The school, he was real smart. Came back and they opened the bank, and it was the Henderson Bank, and Mr. Henderson said, I'm going to make you the president. He said, no, I'll be the vice president at your bank. And I have actually seen a dollar bill. They issued their own in those days. It was a dollar bill, and it was signed personally by Leopld Bashinsky, and it said president on the check, but he inked in VP for vice president. But that was in the bar of my father's and mother's den when I was growing up, that dollar bill, or maybe it was a $2 bill. And so things were going to hell right before the Depression. And Leopld and a bunch of bankers in South Alabama got together, and they made a pact that if there was a run on one of their banks, all the other banks would come to that bank's aid to stop the run, and therefore hopefully save all the banks from having a run. Where a run is people go to the bank and ask for all their money or all their gold that the bank is holding.
Right then, that minute.
Yeah, in that minute. And so what happened was a farmer came in from outside of Troy, walked into Leopold's bank one day, and loud, so everybody could hear him. Leopld, he was making a lot of noise. Leopold came out of his office, met him. Leopold's very smart man, very shrewd, very diplomatic. And the guy said, I want all my money. I don't trust your bank. Leopold said, I want to go. Leopold said, no problem. But it's going to take me a while to get it up. It's back in the back. You came in, you got other business to do in town, right? This morning? The guy said, yeah, Leopold. Everybody trusted Leopold. The lawyers, people went to Leopold to get their disputes resolved instead of going to the lawyers to sue each other. They say, whatever Leopold decides, that's what we're going to go with. According to what I was told by my mother.
Right.
And he died a couple of years before I was born. I was born in 1942. That's more than a lot of the people that watch this podcast. That's quite a bit longer ago than their mothers and fathers were born, and maybe their grandparents even. So the guy leaves, and of course, within the 5 minutes, everybody in the town knew what had happened. So when the guy comes back to get his gold, there's this giant crowd around the bank, out in the street, on the sidewalk, all want to see what's going to happen. And the guy walks into the bank, or Leopold meets him, I think, on the front steps, and he's got 2 bags. He said, here, Mr. Smith or whatever his name was, here's your gold. He dropped it on the ground on the marble steps so everybody could hear it jingle and clangle. Okay.
Oh, the wonderful irony.
The guy got to looking around. He was going to put that on his horse-drawn cart.
What was his life expectancy?
Took out to his farm out in the woods. Everybody in the town and the county within the next half hour is going to know this. And he said, you know, Leopold, I've changed my mind. Here, take your gold back. I'm happy with your bank. Leopold said, no, I don't want your gold. He said, I'm happy with your paper money. He said, look, if you don't trust our paper money, you don't trust our bank. Just take your gold and go home. No, here, please take the gold. I don't want to go. Of course, Leopold had told anybody that was all the gold they had in the bank.
Right.
It was already a Ponzi scheme, okay? Banking is a Ponzi scheme.
Agreed.
So the guy takes the gold back out to his farm. He's coming in every day. Leopold, I want to give you the gold back. Leopold saying, nah, you keep it. We're doing fine. This went on for a while. And finally, the guy was about to go nuts. And Leopold said, all right, I'll take your gold back. So the guy brought the gold back in. It was the only bank down there in South Alabama that didn't go under during the Depression, according to what I was told. So prevent that from happening, the U.S. government passed a law saying you can't ask for your money in gold. We have gone off the gold standard.
Mr. Richard Nixon.
We're on the gold paper standard now. So it wasn't these people today that invented the gold certificates. It was the U.S. government that invented the gold certificates, right?
That is correct.
And they are called greenbacks today. Those are gold certificates. They're supposed to be backed. What was the ratio? When I was in college, I think it was 25%.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a 1-to-4 ratio, but Nixon took us off that. It's now just fiat currency.
So the American government's money is not backed by anything but the American government's money printing press, right?
That is correct. They say it's backed by the goodwill of the American government.
The goodwill, but where do they get their money? They pull out.
That's been my question.
They just print more money, don't they?
That's what I said when I got to go to a Federal Reserve Bank, and I suddenly became a very unpopular individual at that Federal Reserve Bank. And I was not offered a job.
You were not?
I was not. How about that?
I guess they viewed you as un-American.
That was actually one of the words tossed around because this was during the Bush administration.
So there is absolutely nothing backing the U.S. dollar except its printing presses.
That's correct. I had someone try to say to me today that, well, the U.S. government can just offer up public lands. They could just divvy up Yellowstone Park, divvy up parklands, divvy up the Blue Ridge Parkway and pay it that way. And I said, no, they don't have the authority to do that. And because I had yet they don't have the authority to do that yet. But because I had exposed this man's ignorance, I was very much in his disfavor.
You suddenly become probably a liberal communist something, right?
I think he was muttering liberal commie pussy under his breath.
Does he know you have been an economics professor in American colleges?
No, he did not know that until later on, and he used that as an example of why students should not go to college. There would only be shitheads like me to warp their minds.
Was this the guy that was doing the aggressive lending?
This is the guy who does the very aggressive lending.
Tell me the rest of that story that we talked about earlier. This guy, he got an inheritance, right?
He got an inheritance of around $1 million, and he found out that North Carolina had lending rules about what was considered to be usurious rates of lending. But he was fairly close to the Cherokee Indian tribe. And he found out that if he
Be close geographically or close like friendly?
both.
Okay.
So he went and he went on the reservation in North Carolina and he said, guys, I have $1 million here. I want to loan it out. And they said, why don't you want to loan it out yourself? He said, because I'd like to loan it out at interest rates as high as 300%. And after their jaws dropped, the money signs appeared in their eyes, and they said, how soon can we get started? And it doesn't immediately begin as 300% interest, but it works that way up there. For the first week, it might only be 30 or 50% interest, but weekly, it goes up after that. It's like old school mob lending. There's a vigorish on the street interest. And this is perfectly legal.
It's an algorithm that is based on an exponential increase in the interest rate.
You got it.
Let's sum it up.
Yes, sir.
And it's like it's basically the equivalent of a black hole, isn't it?
If you take a loan there and you do not immediately pay it back within a week, it is a black hole.
That's right. And you know what black holes do? They gobble up everything and they spit it back out as energy that feeds the stars. So if you want to be a star, if you want to feed stars, you borrow money from somebody like this. So anyway, that wasn't the end of the conversation. This guy told you he was looking to get out of that business and put it into something
less volatile was his wording.
Yes. And he was prompted to do this by what is now going on in the United States Capitol.
That is correct.
You mean they have even scared the loan shark to death?
They have even put fear into the heart of the loan shark.
Yeah, and he's probably not the only loan shark that they have put the fear of God into, or the devil, more likely into. So, and while you were telling me this story, I offered, well, to be able to pull that off, he's going to have to get the money back from the people he loaned it to at all that interest rate. And you said, that's exactly what I told him. And he turned whiter than a white man can turn white.
Practically, it looked like he had lost all blood flow in his body and had his soul was going someplace elsewhere.
Yeah, and so in fact, the loan shark is falling into his own black hole because the people he has loaned the money to cannot pay it back, and therefore he'll never get it back. And it's being managed by some people on an Indian reservation where the federal government has no operating authority, right?
No jurisdiction whatsoever.
No jurisdiction. So he can't get the feds to help him because it's like an Indian reservation is a foreign country to the United States government. It's an autonomous government.
That's right.
Is that right?
That is what happened as of 1975, the Indian Self-Determination Act.
So the federal government has no authority over what goes on inside of an Indian reservation. There may be some exceptions, I guess, if national security was involved, like somebody took a suitcase nuclear bomb into an Indian reservation, they could probably go in there hunting for that thing, I suppose. But for the most part, the U.S. government cannot meddle in Indian affairs.
That is correct, unless you got it on the nose, unless it is a matter of national security. The only way that federal law enforcement can go on that a Indian reservation has to be the FBI in particular, and there's a time limit to which they can be on the reservation.
So this guy you talked to, the guy that turned sheet white after you told him to pull off to extricate himself from the black hole, or otherwise the Ponzi scheme that he has invested himself in and his inheritance. But that's what it is. He's not going to get it back. He's going to get he's going to get the interest as long as the reservation is paying it to him. And they're taking, I guess, a piece of the action as a commission, right?
That is correct. However, it is a known fact that the Oglala Sioux have contacted some offshore banking interest, and they have said that given that we have borne the risk of having these institutions run off of our reservations, what would stop us from just taking it all? And given that they were talking to attorneys down in the islands, the island attorneys said probably very little.
You mean like an attorney at the Cayman Islands?
An attorney, yes, precisely.
Or Tortola?
It was Caymans. It was Cayman Islands.
Yeah, and I actually spent 2 months on Tortola, and I was doing some banking there. When I needed money, I'd go in there with a credit card and pull money out of my bank account. And I learned then that those people, and later that they were even more tight-lipped and harder to penetrate than the banks in the Cayman Islands, and they were safer for people investing offshore, and than the Cayman Island banks, which were pretty safe, but not entirely. Some people found out eventually, but so. Back to the Indian reservation and the Capitol, the U.S. Congress. If they don't increase the debt limit, what's going to happen?
We will be in default on our debts, and the most immediate effect will be on seniors because they will not receive Social Security checks. Then,
and how about Medicare payments to their doctors and Medicaid payments to their doctors?
Medicare and Medicaid go next, and after that hits federal employees, except for Congress. In other words, members of the House of Congress.
Wait a minute, I got that part. But what about the U.S. military?
No, the U.S. military is already screwed. Once the Medicare and Medicaid is no longer being paid, the military will no longer be being paid.
What about all those Border Patrol agents along Mexico border? What happens to them?
Nope. They're shit out of luck too. Park rangers, shit out of luck.
How about the FBI?
Shit out of luck.
How about the CIA?
Shit out of luck.
How about the National Security Agency?
Shit out of luck.
about the Federal Food and Drug Administration
Definitely shit out of luck. The only
and the
ones,
CDC.
CDC, they're definitely
Yeah,
shit out of luck. The only
EPA.
ones that we're not sure are shit out of luck is Congress. And it's because Congress is trying to ensure a way to make sure that they continue to be paid.
Right.
But
That
anything
makes
else?
now, if you want to have a reason to invade the U.S. Capitol, which people did not have on January 6, 2021. Now it might be a reason. Okay.
Yeah, let's leave it at might be a reason. Yeah.
Might be a reason. If they default on all that and shut down the U.S. government and all those, and I didn't name half, even I just did get started naming all the agencies that are going to shut down. Okay.
Yeah, you named about 5% at most, 3%.
Right. They're all going to shut down because they're not going to get paid. They might get paid for a month or two. Now, this Amendment 14 thing, let me read it again. And it's not my bright idea. I read this in a news article probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. Section 4 of the 14th Amendment, the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned. It's being argued that President Biden can just forget Congress and authorize the Federal Reserve or whatever, which is supposed to be independent, to just make sure the money's there for the government to keep operating and paying its employees and paying its interest on its treasury bills and treasury notes. And I left one of them out. There's 3 of them. And to keep the bank safe, the FDIC, because that's something else that goes out the window if the government doesn't default, right? People whose banks fail not going to get bailed out because they're not going to make money to bail. How well funded is the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation?
That's just it. If the U.S. government defaults on this, the FDIC is not going to have funds to
right
do this.
Who bailed out the people out in California when that bank went busted and their savings accounts and their checking accounts and their CDs were at risk up to $250,000 per account, right?
That's correct.
The FDIC went in there and bailed them out. Where did the FDIC get the money to bail them out?
The FDIC took a
loaned up the money.
That's right, via the Federal Reserve.
So if the government defaults, every bank in America is going to be like Leopold's Bank, okay?
Yeah.
They don't even have gold in the vaults. Everything they do is like on the internet now. I mean, it's cyberspace. It's electronic. You can't take it to the grocery store and spend it. You take a plastic card there and spend it, or you take greenbacks there and spend it. But if everybody that had money in, say, AmSouth Bank or what do they call it now, Regions Bank in Birmingham, if they all went in there and asked for their money in greenbacks, they wouldn't get it because the bank ain't got anywhere close to that kind of money.
That's correct.
The same thing in any city in America, any town where there's a bank. If everybody that banked there went to get their money, they wouldn't get it. It'd be just like this guy trying to get out of the deal he made with the Indian reservation.
This is true.
They would find out that the U.S. government is a Ponzi scheme. Ponzi scheme. Which way is it? Ponzi or Ponzi?
Either one is actually correct.
Okay. Depends on whether you're an American or Italian, I guess, how you pronounce it.
That's what it comes down to.
All right. So these people are playing showdown, and if they shut down the government, Donald Trump is going to make a lot of hay about that. And he will own the Republican Party for the rest of his life.
That's my read.
If those Republicans shut down the government with Trump saying, if I was in there, this would not happen, that would be the end of the Republican Party and the beginning of something else. It's almost over anyway. I think that would absolutely be the end of the Republican Party. I hope President Biden, if he hadn't had a sex change operation, that is, he hasn't had his testicles removed or he hasn't given them away, will man up and invoke the 14th Amendment, Section 4, and get the damn bills paid, regardless of what the fucking Congress does.
That would be mighty white of the Great White Father. I genuinely hope that he does have.
I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think what they probably will end up doing at the last fucking minute, because it's Armageddon from either side for the government to default. Somebody's going to blink. Either the Republican leadership will blink or Biden will blink, and they'll come to some deal in just the nick of time, and they'll be out there patting themselves on the back and boasting about how they save America.
That's what they have done for the past 15 years.
Yes, I didn't make this up. That's what they've been doing every time this comes up. This ain't the first time this has happened.
No, the last time was 2018 and nearly happened during 2020.
And that's when Donald Trump was president.
Yep.
And who blinked then?
At that point in time, it turned out that Trump blinked.
All right. But he wouldn't blink if he was president. Just like he said, if I was president, there would be no war in Ukraine.
Isn't it amazing, his godlike power?
He has got so much godlike power. It's frightening. What's actually frightening is people believe he is God, that he is the Jesus returned to save them from the commies like you and me. We don't belong to either side, okay? They still call us commies.
Yep.
They call us commies, dirty commies, just because we don't fucking agree with them.
And that frightens me almost as much as the default that we have a populace that is that ignorant.
I don't know about it. Ignorant, yes, but also I believe they have mutated.
Oh, we know that.
They become a new species. And they look like the old species, but something has changed in their cerebral cortex or in their soul. And they are now an entirely different species. I wrote to someone recently that she did one of the sculptures in the Civil Rights Park in Birmingham, the four spirits sculpture. She was commissioned for it. She grew up in the tiny kingdom of Mountain Brook, Alabama. I knew her family. She's about 10 years younger than me, so I did not know her other than I'd hear about her every now and then. But I've gotten to know her since. And boy, she is really acerbic. And she's very angry. And but this four spirits thing was the four little girls that were blown up in the 16th Street Baptist Church by white Klansmen from Atlanta who were prosecuted by a Democrat U.S. attorney in Birmingham, and they were convicted.
Many years later.
Yeah, many years later. And the sculpture is about the spirits of the girls going up, to be with God. Whereas the implication is the spirit of the Klansmen went the other direction. And you look at the Republican Party, I don't care what these Republicans tell me. They are so predominantly white that it can only be viewed as a white supremacist organization, an Aryan organization. I don't care what they say their beliefs are. I look at what they're doing. I look at the color of their skin and their rallies. Res ipsa loquitur, the thing speaks for itself in human courts and God's courts. So the Republicans hated that a lot of non-white people are getting a lot of money, the dole from the federal government. Now, I don't like that either, but some of them need it. Hell, I was on Social Security when I was homeless. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't have been able to fucking eat. I spend my entire check every month on food.
And that was money that you had paid in without.
Yeah, I had paid for it by working. And yes. I had bought my Social Security retirement. Actuaries had figured out how much I should pay each week out of my paycheck so that when I retired, I would get, something back every month. And it's been going up every year, the amount, since I went on it when I was 62 years old and homeless. And when I went on it, I no longer could get food stamps. But I was getting more money from Social Security than I was getting in dollar value for food stamps. So I was happy with that.
Right, but it was still just going to feed you.
Right.
Subsistence living.
I told somebody yesterday, I said, when you lived on the street and were homeless as long as I was, you get a different perspective of everything. And that perspective never changes. And these people in Washington, D.C., on both sides of the aisle, they have no idea what it's like not to have a penny to their fucking name, to ride your bicycle up and down Duval Street every morning looking for a nickel or a penny or a dime, or if you're lucky, a quarter that some drunk dropped in the street that night. So you can get 50 cents up and go to a fruit stand on Duval Street and buy an orange so you can get some vitamin C that day to supplement what you're getting at the food kitchen, soup kitchen, which was closed. And the second time I was homeless, I couldn't go to the soup kitchen because they'd moved it out to Stock Island, and they just carried food out there to the homeless shelter where I was banned. So all I had was Social Security to feed me. for several years.
And as we reach the 1 hour mark, are there any more horrible, frightening realities that we want to face before we sign off?
The U.S. Congress should do this. They should announce every one of them before God with their hands on Bibles or Talmuds or whatever, Korans. Bhagavad Gita, I Chings, that if they shut the government down, they will not get paid one penny. They will get no free airplane tickets home. They will lose all of their government benefits, their retirement, their Social Security, the whatever, their medical, permanently. And they will work for free for the rest of their term. How does that sound?
That would be a wonderful thing.
Yeah. And not a snowball's chance in hell that it will happen either. Good night, Bob. Good night, audience.
Good night, Sloan. Good night, audience.